Hello and welcome back to another Hallowoods weekly Q&A behind the scenes backstage live stream extravaganza affair. Thank you so much for tuning in as always, not only to the show itself, but to these behind the scenes Q&As and live streams and other weekly events that we do. This is the only weekly event we do right now. Um, if you have not been to a Q&A before, the general premise is that you can submit questions and they will get answered live on these weekly streams while the show is on the air. Patrons are able to submit questions in advance in an ask box that they can see in Patreon underneath each video listing. And so they submit questions to the ask box and I pile them up and hoard them like pennies and then answer them on these live streams. But if you are watching as part of the general public in the present day, you can click into the YouTube side of things, and there's a chat bar in there where you can submit questions during the stream, and I will answer all of those as well as best I can. So, behind the scenes for this week has been a bit of a disappointing week. As I went out to the post office with a large bag full of finished sketch commissions. There are, I think, nearly 70 sketch commissions finished, package ready to ship, stamps ago. However, to my dismay, I was informed by the lovely and underpaid postal worker standing behind the counter that Canada is on a postal strike, period, for the foreseeable future. Hopefully, one that will end relatively soon. I hope the lovely postal workers get their stipends or pay raises or the conditions of their lobbying. But in the meantime, it is certainly a momentous thing in Canada's life. There are ways to get around it via things like FedEx, and possibly, if the strike doesn't lift soon, there are also several patrons waiting for their merch bundles. So I may have to ship those out via an alternate method to the usual if this strike continues. But in the meantime, it's meant for a bit of a extended delay for our ink sketch commission orderers. So I'm really hoping we can get those out to the post box soon, because I had so much fun working on all of these sketches, doodling both. I think it's kind of a 50-50 split of sort of classic like season one moments and characters. And then sort of obscure things that people don't often think of when they think of what to order necessarily. So I'm always stoked to see what bits of poetry or quotes from the show, or odd things people recall that they want in these illustrations. But I am eagerly looking forward to getting the rest of those on the go. I think other than that, season 5 continues, sort of trekking on through its weekly production. It is moving at a steady clip. I think we're not quite as far ahead as I would like to be. But truth be told, the main goal is just to kind of move through these 8 first episodes of the season. And then after that, we'll be on a bit of a winter break, from mid-December until late January, which will probably stack up to about 5 or 6 weeks. But it will essentially be time in the background for me to not only work ahead on the show and collaborate with other actors and to work on kind of the upcoming season of content, but also to move and kind of make by the between the gap in the show, I will have kind of entirely moved my studio and life to a new locale. And so there will be some time. There's some time budgeted into said break just to make sure that like that all can happen. And I guess although it does interrupt the flow of the show, to do it in a scheduled fashion and not a sort of continuous fashion. But I'm very much looking forward to getting through these next set of 4 episodes that comprise the rest of this first 8. And then after that, and after a bit of a break across December, January, coming back for the next 22 over the course of the next year. Um, it is really wild that not even by this time next year, by probably July or August next year, depending on how far it takes to get through our 30 episodes for the season. Um, we will be halfway through the sort of main body of the Hallowoods as a project. And possibly we'll see, but possibly maybe even a little more in terms of like actual content hours. Just because prior seasons, the first 2 seasons of the show, run 48 episodes and often as long as like 45 minutes to 48 minutes. Um, and then season 4 condenses it a lot, and we're looking more at like 20 to 30-minute episodes and only 30 of them, which was a format that I enjoyed quite a bit. It worked out very nicely for that season, and I don't think I would have done it differently. But now it's it definitely like shortens the amount of content a little bit compared to previous seasons. Definitely the 30 episode length. That might not be the case for every Halloween season going forward. They'll be kind of as long as they need to be. I think 30 episodes is still, I think, a pretty good length for this season in particular. But it's quite possible that for season 6, we'll end up going a little bit more broad, a little bit bigger, and kind of maybe even a return to that season 1, season 2, 48 episode length. I think we'll also be in a pretty good place to do it, because I think the math works out that we will next year get a decent couple months of break before Halloween, which is when we try to do our season, either our season beginnings or our season endings usually. And so I'm happy to kind of be rolling into that with a little bit of build time to work on that season, because it will be, I think, our possibly the most labor intensive season yet. I would not be surprised at all. But it'll be kind of a big, not that every season isn't a big season for the Hallowoods. There's not that many of them, but it will be really the culmination of like a lot of work. 6 years of story at that point. And so, and as the show moves in these kind of sets of 3 seasons, I think 3 trilogies and an epilogue is kind of the goal that was planned. And so as we do that, I think we'll be coming to the end of that middle trilogy, and that will be kind of a big deal. That's our return to the Jedi a little bit. So I'm glad there will be some space in the schedule to kind of work ahead on that, and hit it with a little bit more like prep time and writing ahead and crafting than my usual pace of creation, which is often kind of last minute and like assembling things just as they are ready to go out. And that is par for the course, for a show that is made weekly and goes out weekly. There is no like there's often no like real if I'm going to create space in a schedule that is both weekly and releases episodes weekly, it means making like 2 episodes in a week, and doubling the amount of work. Either that or taking these breaks or hiatuses from time to time. And so there isn't a ton of room in the schedule for that. And I hate taking weeks off if it can be avoided. So, I think this holiday break will be useful in getting the back half of season 5 done. Glad there's a little schedule time in between seasons 5 and 6. and season 6 will be just an exciting deal to get into. Things do tick ahead on novel related projects as well. But there isn't a ton of new news on that front beyond sort of the ball being in the court of the publishing industry. Um, and I am contemplating like either definitely over this next year, probably not over the month left in 2024, but certainly over 2025. In addition to 100 Eyes in the Dark, we are either going to overhaul 100 Eyes in the Dark again, or probably it's either that or kind of craft a whole next novel to begin shopping out and kind of putting through its paces where editing and everything is concerned. And that is the problem with a story that gets finished and then sits for a bit, like 100 Eyes in the Dark, is that I'm looking back on the manuscript and I'm like, ooh, I could do some different things with the story, some fun things with the story. However, it would be a lot more editing work to pursue and kind of transform the manuscript again. So it's a question of temptation at this point. However, in addition to that, there are definitely a couple of other books in the mental tabs waiting to be written. Lady Ethel Mallory's autobiography is one that has been kind of front of mind, and definitely material has been slowly accumulating and gathered for that story. And I think even some early chapters have been written, but there's more. There's going to have to be a point sometime in the next year's schedule where either a lot of weekly hours get allocated over a long period of time, which is quite possible. Or, in the break between seasons, for instance, I can dedicate a month or two to getting that book done. But either way, I look forward to working on that one as well when the opportunity kind of presents itself in the schedule for next year. Um, and then on top of the show production, the eternal writing of things itself, and just being done with our huge batch of sketch commissions, at least on the drawing side, which was kind of the most important thing, just to at least get them finished, because it is a huge amount of work to be staring down the barrel of. But I think the other thing is that I'm currently also running a page through startplaying.games, which is a website where you can pay people to run RPGs for you. And so I've been running 2 weekly campaigns in that side as well, which has been delightful. One of those being a sort of high level Vecna Eve of Ruin campaign, which is a little bit of a sort of road trip across the Dungeons and Dragons multiverse, and kind of a roulette wheel of familiar faces, or at least fun characters to try and take on and voice and figure out their dynamics. So that has been a lovely time. The other is much lower level, kind of more beginner friendly. Out of the Abyss campaign, which is a sort of a crawl through underground caverns and mushroom civilizations and all sorts of demon lord related goodness. That has been a delight as well. But it definitely also adds to the number of projects and the amount of creative story that goes out week to week. But that has been instrumental in making not just the show, but sort of the all basically creative work life that I do sustainable, or at least continue to compete with the cost of rent and groceries and inflation and all that jazz. So taking on that ability to do this hobby of running RPGs, which I've long done for friends and family, and be able to present that to the public, to do that as a little bit of a trade, and then also to just get to have a lot of fun telling more stories along the way. That has been a delightful time. So yeah, I'm keeping my hands full with creative projects, and projects that I'm not even sure I can like completely reveal yet. But I've gotten to be a part of some pretty neat collaborations as well. That I'm just looking forward to getting to share more about as reveals and releases and announcements begin to show up. But in the meantime, I have one question here in the patrons ask box, and it is a somewhat spoilery question. I'll keep it vague as much as possible. But then after that, that is the only question in the ask box. So if anyone would like to toss questions in the chat, you're more than welcome. I will get to those momentarily. This question deals with a character recently introduced in season 5, who is a ghost. And the question is from Lizard, who asks, were there any inspirations for Ratty's character? Ratty being the ghost. And to this, I have to say, I think maybe a little bit less directly than a little bit less directly than some of the other Hallowoods characters, but at the same time, there are some influences that will make sense later, but we're still quite early on with this character. And so, I won't be able to fully like this fully like talk about, what's in what chemicals have gone into the sort of violent formula that is Ratty, compared compared to like some of the characters who have been out a bit longer, and the kind of what's and wherefore of them is a little bit spelled out at this point. But I think a couple broad things. And I will say there are some inspirations I don't think I can mention yet, because I think they would kind of to say them would sort of spoil the the process of getting to know this character that we are kind of descending into over these next episodes. But I think part of that goes to a little bit of a different place than we've seen a lot of Hallowoods characters. Um, we have very, very briefly touched on during season 2. Um, there's this almost throwaway line where Percy is surprised as they're passing through Toronto, that Milo, the former botanist, can like see ghosts, or is fairly casual about the fact that Percy, is an undead spirit. And Milo is just kind of Milo is escorted around by a giant sentient thorn bush, so it's not maybe the strangest thing in Milo's life. But Milo is just kind of, I think, expresses that there's a lot of ghosts in Toronto. And that's something that we revisit a little bit later on. Lady Ethel stops in a haunted apartment in one of her later journeys there. But for the most part, we really have not. It's one of several environments in the kind of modern world of the Hallowoods that we have not really tuned into. Obviously, we spend a lot of time in our fairly secluded northern location, and that is, the core like setting for the show. But these are the people who fled the apocalypse, and migrated north and scavenged what they could, and kind of in not quite invaded, but like they were uninvited, and just staked a fortification out in the woods in northern Ontario. And it's a certain type of personality to do that, and especially when they're not hugely connected to the outside world, except for things like the dry market that bring people up to kind of meeting points to, bring goods from the world below. Um, yeah, the world below sounds much cooler than the world south, but that is the case. Um, then the Hallowoods and its like subsidiary cultures have become a little bit isolated, or they're not too touched by a lot of the world outside. Outside of people like Vincent or the Green Streets, kind of coming in over time and bringing in outside influences. Um, but I think we see that really especially in the scout post, in early season one and such, where they're still trying to figure out how to navigate the increasingly dire supernatural issues in which they find themselves. But then also what comes of that is a lot of understanding, a lot of empathy, a lot of collaboration. Um, and so it is, over that first season and even into season two, we see them grappling with the scale of the supernatural issues around them, but also coming to find that not all of it is scary. Not every zombie or undead thing is trying to kill you. Some of them are. Some of them don't know better, but some of them are not. And that is something you have to evaluate person to person and not make generalizations about undead people. And so that is an understanding that the scout posts has. And I think now in later seasons is trying to is being tested, I think. But that belief, is not necessarily shared worldwide. It hasn't necessarily evolved everywhere in the same place that it has for Scout City. And so there's a number of different places now in season five and onwards that we're going to get to explore that maybe look at how things have gone a little bit differently for different groups of people, different kind of city cultures, different survivor cultures, I suppose. As we kind of pan out to look at a little bit more of what the world is like outside. Um, so at the same time, though, there are some of these environments that have kind of bloomed in their own way. Um, I think we see one of those in the Arctic in season three, late in the season, where we find a group of spirits that have sort of been united unwillingly by a large, annoying spirit bird, but have kind of come up with their own way of coexisting and finding meaning up there. But on a bigger scale, one of the places that we now get to, I think, learn a little bit about more about through Ratty, is this sort of haunted city of Toronto, where souls of a lot of dead people are still managing to eke out some kind of community, and to kind of continue a life, and one that is kind of invisible, I think, to the average scavenger or passerby. And that is one that comes with a little bit of nuance, and it comes with, I think, norms that that only in our main cast, like Ratty and maybe Milo, have insight into right now. And I suppose a couple of other characters through virtue of spending all that time there. But it is a bit of a stark contrast to growing up on your own. In Percy's case, sort of locked by yourself to a place that you can't control, being solitary, being invisible. not having anyone like you, and being, sort of just carried around in the wake of his father for years. Um, and so now we get this experience where now that he's kind of out of that situation, he's able to find that there are people like him, and they are common, and they are not. They don't live in hiding or shame, or just sit around in basements all day. There is a whole world for him that he had no idea existed. And so one of those things that we get hopefully to see over time is what that world looked like, and maybe explore some of his discomfort or just growing pains as he comes to learn about a culture that is his, but that he has had no connection to until much, much, much later in life than many of the people who were born there. Um, there are people who, well, I guess Percy too, but if you're looking at ghosts in the Hallowoods, anyone who died pre Black Rains has been a ghost twice as long as they were alive or more. Or at least, young people in their 20s while they were alive. Um, and so I think this is something that we're going to get to look at through Ratty over time, is just what it looks like for someone who has been dead longer than they were alive, to exist in a thriving but sort of like eccentric, invisible community in this haunted city. Um, and what kind of like social subclasses come into that. I think one of the things tossed out is that Ratty is not just a ghost, but she is a poltergeist. She is like a violent ghost, or a ghost who has a reputation for having done something malevolent. And so, we begin to see, I think, these classifications that seasons ago in the Hallows would have just been, that they're all ghosts, they're just ghosts. But, left to their own devices, these are the kind of labels that appear. So I do look forward to delving more into Haunted Toronto. Haunterano. I look forward to diving more into Ratty's history as well, and kind of what exactly is the deal with this character, who is unlike anything else in the Hallowoods. But we have a full 26 more episodes of season 5 to get into this. So a large part of that is just wait and see. Beanie in the chat says, when Percy met Milo for the first time, I cried. There is something lovely about that as well. And in a way, like I guess it happens a lot through Percy's life through different avenues. But meeting Diggory early in season 1, I think, is one of the first time he's met someone who is undead, that isn't kind of someone who was horribly tortured by Solomon to the point of psychologically breaking. So it's not to say he hadn't met other ghosts by that time, but I mean the ghosts that Solomon carts around are not in a wonderful place conversationally, Al aside. On the flip side, meeting Diggory for that first time is this moment of, you are like me, you understand what it's like to be like me. I am this terrifying, mouth sewn shut, haunted specter who claws messages into the walls attached to this piano. You are a Frankenstein's monster with scissors for fingers. But we both understand each other. And that's one of the first moments that Percy gets of, I think, seeing himself reflected in other people and having that be okay, having that be an identity that is embraced. And we see it again later when he meets Milo, as Beanie says in the chat. And that, comes through a trans identity instead of an undead identity. but it is a significant moment as well. And then a third time later on, again with ghosts, and that's kind of a chapter that we are beginning to learn more about still. But overall, I'm thrilled to. This is quite possibly our messiest season yet in terms of emotions for characters. There is levels of cringe and awkwardness in this in this season that I makes me shudder when I'm writing it. But that is kind of the there's just so much baggage and drama that we have to dive into, and that is hopefully, I think, one of the things that sets this season apart from the rest, and hopefully makes it a story worth telling in the long run, but only time will tell. So I believe that will bring us to the end of our Q&A for today. But thank you so much for attending, everyone, and dropping in to check up on the show. I hope you enjoy where the rest of season 5 is bound. And I can't wait to bring you the back half of 24's episodes. So I'll catch you next Wednesday, folks. Take care. Doodles.